Hello, I'm Dr Jane McCartney. I'm a chartered psychologist in the UK and I'm absolutely fascinated by the criminal mind. In these Psychology of Crime videos, I wanted to take you a little bit behind the scenes of what possibly the thoughts and behaviours and actions of criminals were. And in this episode, I'm going to look at Richard Ramierz, also known as the Night Stalker. But before I get into the video, if I could please ask you to like, subscribe, and please feel free to comment. I'd be really interested. I look at all the comments and I'd be really interested to know what your thoughts are. So, Richard Ramierz, known as the Night Stalker, his crime spree would spread for years, mostly in California, but I do believe that he went into some other states. I'm not particularly going to talk about his crimes because I want to get behind his thoughts and make a suggestion as to what he was thinking when he was committing the crimes. And I'm going to look at 4 specific things. So if we start off with the actual crimes themselves. Now, he was also known as the open door killer, or something similar, because he would literally just walk into people's houses. And his thoughts at those times would have been, you know that there is a serial killer on the loose. You know that at the time, I believe the police were thinking they had lots of different people possibly doing these because the crimes were so random. If you look at somebody like Ted Bundy, he had a certain victim that he would go for, but Ramirez was just completely speculative about his victims. They were young, they were old, they were male, they were female. He didn't care. He wanted to commit his crimes, get his money, get his thrill, get his sexual satisfaction in some cases. So he didn't really care whose houses he was, touching the back door to see if it was open or looking for an open window. So what would his thoughts have been as he was potentially creeping up in the dead of night to a house? He was holding the back door just to see if it had been locked or latched or anything, and it was open. And as he would have walked in, he would have thought, you stupid people, you know exactly what you're letting yourself in for. You've not locked up. There's a killer on the loose, and you've not locked up. You are asking for it. And the types of mind, the psychopathy of mind that Ramirez is like would have been, it's your own fault. You've asked for this. I'm victim blaming. I'm going to come on a little bit about his trial later on, but he would have thought, it's your own fault. This is justified. I keep getting away with this, so I'm kind of sanctioned potentially by a higher power. In Ramirez's case, he was I believe, a Satanist. So he's being sanctioned all the time to do this. So he would have believed that. But ultimately, he would have been blaming the victim. It is their fault. I have an entitlement to come into your house. You're not stopping me. I have a sense of grandiosity to come into your house and commit the crimes that I'm going to commit. And I'm not going to be stopped by you. So those would have been the thoughts that he would have had every time that he entered a crime scene. Imagine the dozens and dozens of houses that he would have gone up to that had locked up, that didn't leave a window open. And he would have just been annoyed about that. He would have just thought, well, it's not to be, or how dare you lock your door. That's likely what he'd been thinking. He may have gone up to a really good house, or where he thought he could have got a lot of spoils from. And he would have been annoyed about that because he had that sense of belief and self-belief in himself that he should be allowed to do this. And he did it for such a long time that every time a crime was committed and every time he wasn't picked up by the police for it, he would have just bolstered that self-belief that what he was doing was okay. It was justified. I'm entitled to do this. So those were the crimes. Now let's get on to the court case. He would have no responsibility. He enjoyed the attention, and the likes of Ramirez do. They have no sympathy. They have no understanding. There was that bit in the court where he'd drawn a pentangle on his hand, and he wanted to show that again to get worldwide fame. He enjoyed the attention, so he would have just again. When it came to the trial, he would have just been victim blaming. It was their fault, and he would have actually been blaming the authorities, the courts. You don't hold me to justice. I am a higher power to you. And again, to touch on the Satanism that he allegedly believed in, he believed that that was the higher power that he should have been. He should have been responsible to, but he got caught. He got put in jail, and he got given the death sentence. He died at the age of 53 before he was able to be executed, but he didn't at any point believe in the system. The only system he believed in was himself. He was in jail for all those years, and yet he still, in his mind, he wouldn't have been believing it. He would have been thinking, right, I'm going to be sprung from prison. I believe that was one of his interviews that he said that he was going to be, by Satan, the devil himself, he was going to be sprung from prison. And add to that his notoriety, not only when he was committing the crimes, but when he got caught and he got taken to jail, the notoriety of all these characters, shall we say, that suddenly had this point of interest to all suddenly come together over. This is very typical of people like that. They'll look for something to all rally behind or get together and tell the authorities that they're all completely wrong in convicting him, even having him in jail. But he enjoyed that notoriety because he came from a pretty poor and abusive background, but that doesn't necessarily make every single person from a poor and abusive background a serial killer. He made his choices. He was a drug addict. He would listen to, you know, his cousin, and there's loads of stuff on YouTube, so please go and have a look at his background. I don't want to get too involved in that. I want to just tell you about what his likely thoughts were. What would he have thought about the victims? He would have pulled them in to the fantasy that he had of his, I don't know, even admiration. I think there was one point where he got one of his victims to say that she actually believed in Satan. And when you're held at a gunpoint or a knife point and you're fearful of your life, you will say anything. And apparently that's what he would do. So he would play with them. He would believe that, again, that he was put in this position. He was controlling it. He was controlling the environment. He had nothing but contempt for them. They shouldn't have been there. Even the young children that he abused and murdered, they shouldn't have been there. It's their fault for being there, or it's their parents' fault for being there. He would have just blamed everybody but himself, and he never took any responsibility at all. So he enjoyed the power, the control, the admiration when it came to the court, and the, you know, bizarrely the validation for what his thoughts were back then when he was committing the crimes. And because of the admiration and the attention that he was getting from these people that were hanging around the court or writing to him, he would have just thought that, you know, all of his actions, his thoughts, his belief were completely valid. That, you know, it just justified everything that he thought about himself. And the last point that I wanted to talk about with regards to Ramirez was the relationship with various women that suddenly appeared out of nowhere. So he's jailed, you know, he's found guilty, he's jailed, he's given the death sentence, and suddenly he gets all of these admiring letters. Now, what do you think was going through his mind when he started receiving these? Again, it was just puffing up his ego, his sense of self-importance. And I believe he actually even married one of the women. Now, what I find interesting about these people is why, and this person, I don't know her name, but this person is not going to be the first, and certainly not going to be the last person to marry, to engage in a relationship of sorts with a notorious criminal or serial killer and marry them. And the interesting thing is, so his ego is puffed up. It kind of relieves the boredom. He probably entered into it because, you know, it puffs up his ego. It gives him validation, that sense of self-importance that he truly believes that he has, but it also probably relieves the boredom. And if there were things that he wasn't allowed to do as a married prisoner, then probably all hell would have been kicked up. And when you get notorious prisoners like that, they know that they're just you know, an inch or two away from having a big debate about them yet again. So the authorities tend to not exactly give in to them, but they have to stick by the book, but they just have to bear in mind that this person's notoriety is bigger than them, and then that would attract the attention on the judiciary system or the penal institution that they're in. So they kind of have to you know, kid gloves really. But let's get back to the person that he married. You know, she could have been any one of the dozens and dozens that contacted him. He was probably saying the same thing to each and every one of them, and then just probably randomly picked her up. So he marries her. But why? Why do women like that get together with the likes of Ramirez? And there's a theory that it's all about their control. Now, if you're married to a psychopathic serial killer who is never going to get out of prison, you're kind of pretty safe. But at the same time, you have a notoriety. Suddenly, I'm Mrs. Ramirez, and look, I can go around and I'm married to Richard Ramierz, and I'm Mrs. Ramirez, and you get a sort of like puffed up ego for yourself. You like the attention. And often these women will come from quite often they're kind of a bit wallflowery, they're a bit quiet, and they've never really had a lot of attention, and they enjoy the attention that they suddenly get. Or alternatively, they've come from lots of attention and it's just another way of carrying that on. So there's a sense of safety, if you like, bizarre and perverse safety, but it is a sense of safety. They enjoy the belief that they have the power over not only the situation, but that person. Time and time again, you would hear about, you'd have these women being interviewed and you'd hear about them saying, well, I am the only person in the world that he will listen to. Yeah, possibly that's what you think and you're allowed to think. The reason being that if he started kicking up a fuss about you, then certain privileges and rights and attention would be taken off him. So he tolerates that. You would just be one of many. They'll tell you exactly what they think that you want to hear to maintain you in that position for the time being. What else would they have been thinking when they were getting married to, I'm using Ramirez as the example, but as we know, this does go on all the time. They would be thinking, yes, I'm the only person that can tame this person. I'm in a sense of power and control. But also they would be thinking, yeah, I know that he's been contacted by dozens and dozens of women and he's picked me. That makes me feel special. And they kind of wear that as a badge of honour for the rest of their lives, or until they go and marry somebody else that's potentially incarcerated for the rest of their lives. I don't know the details of whether he was married still when he died and this person became officially his widow, and I'm not entirely sure he had any estate, but he had a legacy, and sometimes people want to continue that legacy. Haven't heard much about it. Done a bit of research, can't seem to find much about it, but feel free to make a comment, let me know, I'd be really interested to know. So that was Richard Ramierz, also known as the Night Stalker. Thank you ever so much for watching. If I could please ask you to subscribe and to like and to please leave some comments below, that's really good. I do read all of them and it's really, really important. And if you would like some more details, I do a podcast called Why Killers Kill. I'll put a link to it below. And it's a bit longer and it just gives a few more details about, what people believed, what they thought, what their actions were, what their behaviours were when they were committing crimes and afterwards. So yeah, I'll put a link to it below. Until then, thanks ever so much and goodbye.